This congregation is very familiar with working with disaster relief, and we've done this for years, where we'll go and help people who have gone through some sort of hurricane or gone through some sort of major problem where they have been devastated. The hurricanes have come in and it flooded their homes. We've seen all kinds of different things, just like many of you have. And we've gone and tried to help as much as we can. Well, we took a trip down south several years ago, and there were several things that we noticed. This hurricane had come through and it had wiped out people's homes. Some of them had just dealt with flooding. Some of them had lost almost everything, if not everything. I remember one day we were all working, and we were working on this home, and we were trying to take things out of the garage and put them out next to the road so the city would come by and take them out. And this lady that we were helping, she was a hoarder. And I mean by hoarder, I mean she kept everything. She had boxes and boxes and boxes and boxes of things. And the water had gotten so high that it had gone up into her attic. So everything that was in her garage had completely been underwater, completely waterlogged. She had had magazines for years and years and years back. She had had all these bills and all these things, all these papers, it had all these things. And I understand keeping things. I understand keeping things that are important to you. Don't get me wrong. But she was keeping everything. And as our group was coming out, she wanted to inspect every single box. She wanted to take every single waterlogged magazine out to see if there was anything that she could salvage, anything at all. Because there was something, she thought she could find something in there. It took us forever because she just stood there and goes, let me see this box. And there were hundreds of boxes in there. Well, we did this for hours and hours one day and finally said we're going to go somewhere else because that was a very difficult thing. And we went to another house and we were working, and this family were allowing us just to take things that were ruined out. And as the day goes on and we're dragging all these things out, I remember looking across the street. We were near the ocean, looked across the street, and there was a lady standing just across the street in a field. It was just kind of a big yard. She was just standing there all by herself, nobody there with her. And so after we saw her stand over there for a little while, I thought, well, I'm going to go over and speak to her. Maybe we can do something. And as I got closer, I saw a foundation, and that was it. I saw a foundation. She was standing on a concrete slab. And I walked over and I said, ma'am, are you doing okay? And she said, no. And I said, what's going on? How can we help you? We're here and would like to do anything. She goes, I don't think you can help me. She said, why is that? She goes, well, I'm standing in my living room. This is where my living room was. And she said, the whole house is gone. And it had just been, the waves had come in. It was close enough to the beach. And then she said, do you see that one over there? And I looked over and there was a slab over there. She goes, I owned that house too. And she said, do you see that one right there? And there was another one. They were all kind of on a very, like neighbors. She said, I owned that one too. And there were just 3 concrete slabs there. And she had no idea what she was going to do. We stood there and talked to her for the longest time. She would just have bouts of silence where she would just look and not know what to do. And she felt completely out of control. She felt like she had lost everything. She had nothing to prop up on. But the lady the day before still had all of her stuff. It was just ruined, but she was searching through, trying to find something to hang on to, something that was still there. The truth of the matter is our lives are filled with ups and downs. Sometimes they seem terrible, and sometimes they don't seem that bad, and sometimes they seem amazing, and sometimes we just wish things were normal again. And some things are life-altering, and some things aren't. And the thing is, what's interesting about this concept about the way we feel is our feelings are almost always based on experience. That's the reason when a boy breaks up with a 13-year-old girl, she feels like it's the end of the world. because the life experience has not been there to allow her to feel things that might have been stronger or might have been hurt worse. But because of that experience, because she had this is what she's dealt with, to her, the feeling of that, of not knowing, of rejection, of how's she going to face her friends tomorrow, that feels as strong as the lady who lost all her houses. You and I said that doesn't make any sense. But when you think about it, our joy and our victories and our bad days and our losses so many times are based on what we've experienced before. If you're a person who's experienced extreme loss, then there are certain things that just don't seem like they're that big of a deal to you. They're not that big of a deal, but there are other people who may not have gone through that, and what's not a big deal to you is what is life-crushing for them. It's what's so heavy. And it's easy for a person who's gone through a lot of heartache, who's gone through a lot of hard things, to look at somebody who hasn't gone through much and think, what are you upset about? Why? You have nothing. And we make these comparisons when they're not fair comparisons. They're not fair comparisons because experience is so much a part of what molds how we feel about things. Well, joy. It's so interesting sometimes how the smallest things can bring about the greatest amount of joy. Sometimes it's those small things, and the reason they mean so much is because of experience. Because of negatives, because of loss, because of highs, because of good things. Sometimes those small things, they're not just about what it is, but it's about what it represents. I was telling my family, I remember going to camp when I was about 9 years old, and I loved Butterfinger. Butterfinger was one of my favorite candy bars of all time at the time. It's still pretty close to the top, but I mean, and they had put out the king size one not too long. That's how long ago this was. They had just started making king size one. I was like, what's better than a Butterfinger? A king size Butterfinger, you know? Well, we were at camp, and I was kind of upset because we had canteen at camp, and I wasn't the kind of person in my house where you got to eat a lot of candy. I mean, we ate some, but we didn't eat it all the time. And if we wanted to stop, we get to pick if we're going places, but it wasn't something we had around the house all the time. And I remember when I would go to camp, we had canteen, and I could get any candy I wanted. I could go up there and I could get any candy bar, but they didn't have Butterfinger. And it was like I couldn't believe they didn't have Butterfinger. I mean, I was so distraught. This was my week that I was going to eat a Butterfinger every single day. They didn't have Butterfinger. Well, I remember we had a teacher who was coming in to teach classes. And we were talking one day, and I remember goofing off with him. He goes, how's your week going? I go, it's great, but they don't have Butterfinger. You know, like everything at camp's awesome. They still have Butterfinger. I was joking, but I was serious. I remember the next day that guy come in, and he brought me a Butterfinger. It was the smallest thing, but for whatever reason, I felt like this guy remembered me. This guy thought about me. Like, this guy stopped at the store and got a Butterfinger. I mean, it meant so much to me. It's something I just never forgot as a little guy. Was that somebody thought enough to do something like that. That was the best Butterfinger I'd ever eaten in my life. I've never eaten one that tastes near as good as that one did. Joy is one of those things that can bring us up and lift us up, but when we lose it, we want it back. When we lose it, we want it back. There have been over 50,000 self-help books written in the last 6 years. Over 50,000. I want you to think about that number of books just on self-help. Did you know that the self-help industry is expected within the next 5 years to be an $81 billion industry? Self-help. You know why? Because no matter where we are, we always expect it to get better. No matter where we are, we always expect it to get better, and we want it to get better. I think one of the things that we can do to help focus the way we see our lives and the way we see the things that are going on in our lives is to figure out the things that rob our joy, the things that take away our joy. The book of Philippians, I want you to turn there. We're going to flip back and forth quite a bit and look at a couple of situations, because the book of Philippians is one of those that it's really, really rich with some exciting things. There's this church that Paul absolutely loved. They had some personality issues. They had some personality problems, but for the most part, they were unified. For the most part, they got along. For the most part, they cared for one another, and they really took care of Paul. Paul's in prison, and they had hired this man, where they took care of this man, and they sent him up and said, we want you to stay up there with Paul as long as he needs you. You take him this care basket, and here's some extra money. Here's money for you. We're going to take care of your family, and you just see to Paul's needs while he's in prison. We love Paul that much, and I don't know what the gift was that they brought to him. He just said, you brought me a gift. But when Epaphroditus shows up with this gift, you know that Paul's sitting in prison just lit up. I can't believe that you sent this person this far. I can't believe you did this for me. And so he writes this letter back to him. And it's just dripping with, I love you, and there's so much joy, there's so much good. You have helped me so much. You've helped so many people. You've helped me before. When I think of you, I just get so excited. I can't help but praying for you. And every time I think of you, I think of what else God's going to do with you. Paul was just excited about this Philippian church. And there was an atmosphere in that church. There was an atmosphere in that church where they cared for one another and they loved one another, and it brought about a joy that other people felt. But in the midst of it, all these words, joy, all the time the word joy is mentioned, rejoice, and all these things, all these positive things, a lot of those statements are in response to things that were challenging their joy, that were trying to take it away, that were trying to pull at it, that were trying to take away the positive things in their lives. First of all was circumstances. Philippians chapter 1, starting at verse 12, going to verse 14. Paul says, but I want you to know, brethren, that the things which happened to me have actually turned out for the furtherance of the gospel. I don't like that I'm in jail. I don't like what's going on. But it's actually turned out good, so that it has become evident to the whole palace guard and to all the rest of my chains, to all the rest that my chains are in Christ. He says, and most of the brethren in the Lord, having become confident by my chains, are much more bold to speak the words without fear. He says, I'm in jail right now, and I refuse to let this stop me. Now, the problem is that he says this, that Paul says it's actually turned out for good, means that for a while it wasn't. It means that for a while, Paul was feeling heavy. And for a while, the Philippian church was very upset about Paul and what was going on with him. You got to remember, he had been imprisoned in Philippi. The jailer was the one that laid stripes on him, probably. The jailer was the one that pulled him out. The jailer knew who he was. The jailer was a member of that congregation, and he probably couldn't stand that Paul was back in prison somewhere. He knew what it was like to be in prison. He knew what those guards would do to him. He knew the laws. He knew what they would allow, what they wouldn't allow. The Philippian jailer was probably a part of this plan to go back and help Paul in jail somewhere else. Paul says, my circumstances have actually turned out good, meaning that they weren't great for a while. Chapter 2 and verse 17, he says, yes, and if I am being poured out as a drink offering on the sacrifice and service of your faith, I'm glad and rejoice with you all. He says, well, if I'm being poured out like a drink, if I'm being sacrificed, so to speak, if my negative circumstance is set up so that it somehow helps you, he says, I'm okay with it. Listen, it's easy for our circumstances to drain us. It's easy to get some bad news and it drain us. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with our circumstances being hard. Maybe it is that you're going through a difficult time in life. Maybe it is that somebody you love is going through something difficult. Maybe it is that there's something going on around you that you can't control, because if you could, you'd fix it. But because the circumstances that we find ourselves in, maybe it was the loss of a job, maybe it was a money situation, maybe it was that a family member did something or a friend did something, and we find ourselves in circumstances, it's easy for us to allow those circumstances to completely drain us. Here's the thing, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having hard times. There's nothing wrong with you if you're dealing with something hard. Sometimes things are just difficult. But it's how we deal with those things that are so important. The truth. Our circumstances can absolutely rob our joy. They can absolutely take away the good and the positive in our life. The next thing you see here is he talks to them about people. In Philippians chapter 1, going back to verse 15, so some indeed, he says, he's talking to them about a group of people who are teaching things that aren't right. And he says, some indeed preach Christ even for envy and strife. He says, I'm in jail and it's actually turned out for good, but there's some people out here who the reason that they're preaching Christ is because they're jealous and they want to cause problems. And some also, but for goodwill. He goes, the former, those with bad attitudes, the former out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing to add affliction to my chains. He says, but the latter out of love, knowing that I'm appointed for the defense of the gospel. He says, there are people out there that are called. He goes, I'm sitting here in my jail cell wishing that I could get out and preach, but there are people out there who have the opportunity and they're not handling it right. They're causing more problems. If I could get out and fix these problems that people are involved in, it would help so much. People can take away our joy. They can be a source of our problems. If you go to chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, he says this, therefore, if there's any consolation in Christ, if comfort or love, if any fellowship of spirit, if any affliction, mercy, fulfill my joy by being like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord and one mind. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition and conceit. He brings it up again. He goes, there are those who are doing this. There are those who are preaching the truth. There are those who are claiming to help the church, but they're hurting the church. Don't you be like that. Here's the key. The truth of the matter is, people can rub us the wrong way. People can make us mad. How many times have you stayed awake? How many times have I stayed awake at night, couldn't go to sleep because somebody said something that I didn't like? Somebody did something that I wish they hadn't have done, and it just bugged the fire out of me. How many times have we been angry? How many times when somebody's name comes up, the first thing we want to do is go, let me tell you what they did to me. People can control. We have this ability to let people control our emotions. And they can. Because our relationships are important to us. People are important to us. How people view us are important to us. And when there's turmoil, when there's problems and with other people, sometimes our joy is gone. It's drained and it can eclipse important things in our lives. He recognized with this Philippian church that was filled with joy that sometimes circumstances warred against their positive nature. Sometimes people warred against their positive nature. There's something else here. Things, stuff. Chapter 3 and verse 8, he says, yes, indeed, I also count all things loss for the excellence of the knowledge of Christ Jesus my Lord. And then he says in chapter 4 and verse 12, not that I have already attained or am already perfected, but I press on that I may lay hold of that from which Christ Jesus has also laid hold of me. Here's the point. The reason he puts that in there, if you look at the flow of the book of Philippians, it's all good. We love you. I love you. You love one another. You love me. Things are great. But there are things that are trying to stop y'all from being as good as you can be. And he said sometimes it's materialism. Sometimes it's what I don't have, what I wish I had, what somebody else has. Sometimes it's all wrapped up in what we possess or what we don't possess. And those things can take away the important things in our lives. This church that was so filled with positivity, he said, you got to watch out for your circumstances. Don't let them drain you. You got to make sure that people and their attitudes don't hurt how positive and good you are. And you got to make sure that you don't get so wrapped up in material things that you forget the spiritual. Because somehow I'm supposed to make the spiritual things more important than the physical. I don't always like that answer. That's not always the best one, but somehow I'm supposed to do that. Paul said, I count everything as trash. Well, it's an interesting statement that he says that. I want to talk about this for a second. They sent him a gift, and he said, things don't matter to me. They could have been offended by that. Well, Paul, we sent you a gift, and now you're telling me all the stuff is trash to you. Are you calling our gift? No, that wasn't what he was saying. That wasn't what he was saying at all. What he was saying was, your gift is important to me because what it represents. But I've learned I don't need a whole lot. I'm more focused on spiritual than I am physical. And listen, that's hard to do in the world that we live in. But somehow we can't allow things to steal or rob our joy. There's one more thing I want to make mention of, and that's this: worry. Go back to chapter 1 and verse 28. I told you we're flipping back and forth, but they're all hidden in the passage. Verse 27 of Philippians chapter 1, he says, only let your conduct be worthy of the gospel of Christ. He goes, you've got a lot warring against you. Let your conduct be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or am absent, I may hear of your affairs, and that you stand fast in one spirit, with one mind, striving together with the faith of the gospel, and not in any way terrified by your adversaries, which is to them a proof of perdition, but to you salvation, and that from God. Just mentioning here, this church with all this joy, he goes, you got a lot to worry about. I've heard people say along the way that worry is sin. That's not true. It's not a sin to worry. That is not true, and that's not what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount. It is not a sin. If you care about somebody, or you care about something, or you care about the outcome, or you care about something, and it doesn't go the way you want to, you will feel that. If your child is supposed to be at home at a certain time, and you know where they were, but you don't know where they are, and you're not concerned about them, then there's something wrong with you. You can't say, oh, it's a faith issue. It's not a faith issue. If we care about people, if we care about things, sometimes we worry. And maybe the word is the problem we have. Maybe it's a translation issue. Because Paul talked about how even though he had been beaten with rods, shipwrecked, all these things, he carried around this deep concern for all the churches. Well, it's not him worrying about what's going on with these churches. He said, I don't want you to be afraid or fearful or terrified of your adversaries. They had adversaries that weren't doing anything but might do something, and they were concerned about that. Sometimes our joy is completely taken away by what might happen, by what might not happen. The problem with worry is when we allow it to take over, when we allow it to take control, when we allow our worry and our concern to overtake our faith in God. When we try to fix things that we want God to fix, when we don't trust Him enough and we try to take things into our own hands, when we get so concerned, like Abraham was so concerned he wasn't going to have a child, they just decided to come up with an alternate plan. That was a problem. But here's the truth of the matter, and we're going to conclude with a pretty interesting conclusion here. First of all, the way we see life can be very, very strongly affected by our circumstances. It can be very strongly affected by people and what they think and what they say. It can be very, very strongly affected by stuff, by things. it can be very, very, very strongly affected by what we're carrying. Concerns, heartache, problems. But what's interesting, in the book of Philippians, Paul answers every one of these. In the flow of this, if you read the book over and over, you see these things rise to the top. You have joy. You have this positive attitude. You have this positive atmosphere in this church. You're individually, you're very positive, but there are things that can steal that from you. Go back and look at chapter 4 and verse 11. In chapter 4 and verse 11, he's talking, when we talk about our circumstances, it started at verse 10, he says, "But I rejoiced in the Lord greatly that now at last your care for me has flourished again. Though you surely did care, but you lacked opportunity. Not that I speak in regard to need, for I have learned that whatever state I'm in to be content." The man's in jail, and he says, "I'm so thankful for you that you thought about me, that you cared about me, that you took care of me, that you sent this man to take care of me. I'm so thankful for you. But one thing that I've learned is this jail's not going to affect who I am. And this prison is not going to affect how I see life. The circumstances that I am will not control me. I will manage them, and I will deal with them." He says, "I've learned that whatever state I'm in to be content." He says in verse 12, "I know how to be abased and I know how to abound. I know how to have struggles and I know how to be strong. I know how to go backwards and I know how to go forwards. I know how to be abased and I know how to abound. Everywhere in all things I've learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." It doesn't mean he can hit a softball further than you can at a church league softball game. It means he can deal with whatever's going on in his life because his circumstance don't define how he sees life. They're just a part of his life. Joseph was in a pit. He was a slave and he was in prison. And he said, "How can I sin against God?" David hid in caves from his son Absalom and said, "Thou, O Lord, art a shield about me." Jonah was in the belly of the fish and said, "I will sacrifice to you with the voice of thanksgiving." And Jesus was weeping in the garden and said, "Not my will, but yours be done." My circumstances do not define who I am. They do not define how I act. And they will not define how I see this life. What about people? Chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. We already read the passage, but it's the answer to it. He says, "Let nothing be done with selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself." Verse 4, "Let each of you look out not only for his own interests, but also for the interests of others." How shall I see other people? You don't control me. You don't control my attitude. You don't control my relationship with God, and you don't control my attitude. You might can affect me. You might can bother me, but you will not control me. And so he says the way we battle that is we don't do anything ourselves out of selfish conceit. That even though others may do things that we don't like, we should look out not only for our own interests, but for their interests as well. And then you go to same chapter 2, verse 14 through 16. "Do all things without complaining and disputing, that you may become blameless and harmless, children of God without fault, in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation." All these people that you live with, I want you to be blameless and harmless without fault among them, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast the word of life, so that I may rejoice in the day of Christ, that I have not run in vain and labored in vain. He said, people don't affect how you see things. And then things. He says in chapter 3 and verse 8, the same passage, "Things don't matter to me. I also count all things lost for the excellence of the knowledge of Christ Jesus my Lord. What I know about Jesus is more important than what I have. What I know about what Jesus has done is more important than anything this life has to offer me. And I'll do everything I can to focus on him above that." The last one is worry. Look at chapter 4 and verse 8. Finally, brethren, you've heard this verse, but think about this passage in light of worrying, things that can rob your joy, things that can take away parts of our lives that we want whole. Finally, brethren, focus on what's positive, he says. Whatever things are true, and whatever things are noble, and whatever things are just, and whatever things are pure, and whatever things are lovely, and whatever things are of good report. If there's any virtue, if there's anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. That's a passage we like to go to and kind of break it apart and look at each individual word, but that's not the reason that was written. Paul said, you're some of the happiest people on the planet. You've got this atmosphere of positivity. You've got this joy that seeps from your members, and it permeates through the whole congregation, even to the point that you've sent a man up to take care of me. I absolutely love you people. Do not let anything stop you from focusing on what you should be. Focus on the good. Focus on the positive. If it's true, if it's right, if it's wholesome, if it's pure, if it's whatever it is, look for that stuff. That's hard to do sometimes. But my circumstances don't control me. People don't control me. Stuff don't control me. And worry don't control me. It's my faith in the God of the universe, who has blessed me with the knowledge of His Son and the sacrifice that was made for the forgiveness of my sins, that takes away all imperfection in my life, that gives me something to strive for and look for in the darkest of times or in the roughest of spots. Reclaiming our attitudes will bring about a sense of peace in our lives that we won't be able to describe to someone else. But while I let everything else affect how I see, then I don't feel in control. We all long to have a little bit of control. And once we reclaim our attitudes, we feel in control of our spirituality again. Maybe there's someone here who feels out of control. Reclaim what God has offered. Reclaim what He's handed. Don't let other things rob what God is trying to give you. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be concerned. It's okay to feel like a failure when things happen that you can't control. But those don't define who we are. They don't define how we see things. We can't allow them to overtake what God is offering. Paul looked at that church and said, you are good people and you got a lot of great things going on, but you know there are a lot of things tugging against you. You hold together individually and collectively, and you take care of one another, and you don't let anything take away the good that you have. That ought to be the way we see this congregation. That's the way we ought to see our families. That's the way we ought to see this life. Maybe there's someone here who's not been baptized for forgiveness of your sins. We'd love to study with you about that. But maybe there's someone who has been baptized, but you're dealing with something. Maybe appropriate response is to walk out here today and say, I'm back in control, and I am going to have my confidence in God. But if we can help you with that, then we would love to do so. If we can help you in any way, if we can pray for you, if we can pray with you, if there's anything that we can do to help you, we're on your side. You are us, and you are important to us. We want to go to heaven. We want you to be there too. If we can help you in any way, please let us know how as we stand and sing this song.